My guest today, I have tried to get on this podcast before, probably over 10 years ago. I tried a couple times and I couldn't make it happen. So then 10 years goes by, and randomly coming across my desk is the opportunity to interview my guest today. My guest today is Seth Godin. He's an author, entrepreneur, former .com executive, and he has one of the best, most long-standing blogs around. If you're into business, if you're into being an entrepreneur and you can't learn something from Seth Godin, there is something wrong with you. Without any further delay, let's jump right into my conversation with one Seth Godin. I hope you enjoy. So Seth, for me, if I had to go back in time and say, how did you influence me? It would really probably be the Linchpin book. Because the Linchpin book was this book that essentially for me, it spoke to me and said, it gave me permission as the guy who's written 8 books in the trading world, but it interviewed hundreds of people, many people that you know, completely outside the trading world. But there was something about that book, just language that it spoke to me. And I was like, for sure, that shaped my existence. I mean, here I am. I'm talking to you from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam today, right? I'm nowhere close to you. But I'm sure even making that choice all those years ago to stay here was somewhat connected to the work that you were doing because it always gave me permission to say, why not? Let's go for it. Let's do it. Why just sit still? I got to give you a big shout out for that.
Well, I'm glad it resonated. That's why you write books. I appreciate that.
As a setup here, my favorite story that you have shared, and I think you'll recall it in more detail than me, but there was a professor that you had in Boston, I believe, and there was a building with some kind of damaged drywall. They couldn't get something fixed, and this professor came in and said, listen, I'll fix it for you, but you've got to pay me this fee. And I think it was $45,000 if I get it right. He gave them the name of a simple chemical from a hardware store. It fixed the problem, saved this building. It was such a simple story, but it was like, oh, it's such a great story. I'm sure other people have really loved that story as well.
The story is about value, not cost, right? That this 40-story skyscraper had a $20 million problem. For him to be able to solve it for $45,000 was a bargain. The fact that it only took him 10 seconds is irrelevant. It took him years to be able to know what to write down on that piece of paper. But too often, freelancers get hung up on our labor as opposed to our ability to deliver value.
What was so great about it too was the moxie, the bravado, the confidence, the wisdom to say, I'm going to do it. And for sure that shaped some of my thinking because it's like, well, hold on. How did that guy Seth even find that story exactly? And he's finding these stories all the time. It calmed me down and made me not worry about certain things that maybe you hear from growing up in school and all that kind of stuff. And it just focused you on the most important thing. At least that's what it did for me.
Terrific. Well, I'm not taking any credit, but I'm glad I was present when you figured it out.
Well, there's a great word for you right there, present, huh? As I currently live in a Buddhist country, another fantastic word, right? I mean, because that's all we got. That's all we got right now is the present, right?
Yes, some people think that the past let us do what we do today with no choices, but I like to think that the future is counting on us to make the choices it needs us to make so it can arrive.
Can I ask you a big picture question before we get into some of the new book? How many books are you right now? 20 plus books. What is your process? The research process for my books has been quite arduous, and I'm assuming it is for you too, but perhaps you can share with all of us, for those that have written books and for those that have not yet, and they're inspired to write books, what becomes that initial research process for you? Is it always different? Is it similar?
My process is largely irrelevant because what I had for breakfast doesn't matter. The method that I recommend to people who want to do the generous act of writing a nonfiction book is to buy a $49 digital tape recorder, make an appointment to go for a walk with a friend that you admire, and in that walk, teach them something that matters to you. Do it as you're walking, by describing, by telling stories, by making your argument. If you can't do that, you don't have a book in you. If you can do that, when you transcribe what you said, you have the first draft. There are definitely books that benefit from extraordinary research. Lewis Hyde's book, The Gift, comes to mind immediately. That's not me. I'm not Charles Darwin either. I wake up in the morning and living my life is my research. I am looking for things I do not understand, and I'm trying to explain them first to myself and then to other people in a way that they find useful. And it only becomes a book if I feel like I have no choice. If I can get rid of the lesson with a blog post, my life is much easier than I have to devote a year of my life to bringing a book to people who don't know about it yet.
Yeah, I think something you said in there is really key is the inspirations, whether they're small or large. And I look at my situation being here in Vietnam for 10 plus years, the inspirations have never stopped. I love that feeling of every day there's something. Someone phrased a sentence, the way they talk, their mannerisms, the politeness, all that stuff. It keeps my brain on fire nonstop. I'm sure you have a similar feeling, but you find your inspirations in different ways since you're not in Vietnam.
I've never been. It's one of the places I would like to go one day.
Let's get into strategy. I think I should probably open the floor up to you a little bit to let you explain your definition of strategy and perhaps why you've come to write this new work. I think it's one of these things where, I guess in my mind too, as I was going through the book, I'm essentially a freelancer too, but it's somebody who has not worked for somebody for a very long time, 3+ decades. But then I have friends that perhaps have the corporate job or the government job. Strategy is going to be different depending on where you sit. Now, you might agree or disagree with that, but why don't I let you open it up to why the word strategy was so important to you right now?
I don't think the concept of strategy is different based on where you sit, just like the concept of food doesn't change. The food you may choose to eat could be different based on your situation, but food, we understand the definition of food. Strategy is not tactics. Strategy is not all the things you need to do to get a thing to happen. Strategy is a philosophy of becoming. Strategy is the bigger choices we make that determine the tactics we will have to choose from, the change you seek to make in the world. Strategy has four things all woven together, and they don't seem related, but they are. They are games, and a game is any situation with players and rules and boundaries and outcomes. The second thing is systems, and I could talk about systems all day. Systems are invisible, they are persistent, they are conspiracies of humans coming together to build a society that leads to outcomes that make us come back to the system. The third one is empathy, which is it's not up to you what other people are going to do. People make a choice. And in free societies, we have more choices than in other places. But when you show up to cause a change to happen, other people have to say, yes, thank you. I will engage with that. The fourth one, the one that's the hardest to visualize, the reason that people had so much trouble dealing with evolution is time. Time is invisible. Time is nature's way of making sure everything doesn't happen all at once. Time is inevitable. When we bring a strategy to the world, what we're saying is not, this is it today. We're saying, I'm going to create the conditions for tomorrow and the tomorrow after that. If you're not talking about time, then you don't have a strategy.
Let me keep you at that word system for a second, and I'll share with you really quick so you know something about me. Most of my books have been about trading systems and trading systems based on price movement, very quant, essentially not trying to predict tomorrow, but if the market is moving, you're following it. You're either long or short. Applying a system to the markets allows you to not worry about the day-to-day fluctuations necessarily. You can't control the outcome. You can't predict tomorrow. Not only is there the system that I might want to apply to the markets. It's the systems that are on top of us every day that we have to exist in. I mean, these systems are there whether we like them or not. We have to navigate systems nonstop every day.
Yeah. So I'm a semantics person. Stock trading and investing systems are tactics, they're not systems. The stock market is a system in the sense that somehow people have come to agree that a price earnings ratio of 42 is appropriate for this kind of organization. And certain stocks go up in value because the system magically, without anybody being in charge, makes that happen. That's a system. Then the tactics of a successful trading system can take advantage of the unseen elements that make something like the stock market work. It's fascinating to be in New York, in the old days, I got arrested on the floor of the American Stock Exchange when I was 14, watching the people, each cog in the system, thinking that they're the center of it and that it revolves around them when they have no clue. The system is wider and deeper and older than almost anybody can realize.
Let me look at it this way. Essentially, where you're getting us all to come into your perspective here is to imagine these wider systems. We're just a pebble in the water and we can jump into the system. It's still going to be there when we're gone.
Yeah. I invented email marketing. If I hadn't done it, somebody else would have. The version I invented had no spam in it, but I couldn't stop that from happening. Sand Hill Road was 3 firms in one real estate complex on one road in Menlo Park, California. They pioneered the venture capital system, but if those firms went away, the system would persist, right? That maybe we can name a system, put our imprint on the system, but these systems, we're able to influence them, but cursing them doesn't do us very much good.
Let me keep you at email marketing as a side tangent for a second. There is no way that I would be sitting here talking to you right now if email marketing did not exist. No way, no how. I am absolutely one of these people that understands the value of it in 2024, the same way that I understood it when I put my first website up in 1996. There's aspects that have perhaps changed, but the way that people use email and it being important, that has not shifted. I still remember to this day having a server on a laptop in my garage circa 97, 98. And I always found it so fascinating to watch people signing up for my email newsletter in real time, right? And that changes you. There is a significant number of people that still to this day do not understand the importance of email marketing.
Because they don't understand the importance of attention and trust. Spammers trade trust for attention, but email marketers trade attention for trust. That you don't have very many opportunities to talk to somebody who wants to hear from you. And if you waste one of those, you could lose them forever.
It is when someone gives you their email and they say, I want to hear from you, and you give them the permission to either subscribe or unsubscribe at their choice. If you can just trust that system and deliver inside that system, again, I would not be talking to you if I did not figure that out a long time ago. So many topics. And you know this, the way that you write. And I was thinking about this earlier, the way that you write, it's kind of like each line is an aphorism. I look at your work sometimes and I'm like, we could just take one page and pull it apart for the next 2 hours. You know this. You do this to torture us all, I think. But let's talk about project work. I can't give you all the credit for this or anything because I have to do the projects, but the project work thinking I've had for 25 plus years of my life. And I wake up every day on a project. I have to do a project, whether it's the small project that day or the larger project that's in the funnel, so to speak. That's the way I think. I can't think any other way. How long have you been like that?
1974, when I was 14.
What caused you to think in terms of projects at age 14?
Probably undiagnosed ADHD combined with the scaffolding my parents gave me to realize I had a chance to be a productive contribution. That the expectation in my house was you don't have to do anything, but you better do something that other people value.
How did your parents say that to you exactly? Or how did they show that to you?
My dad was the volunteer head of the United Way. He was on the board of the Black Baptist Church in Buffalo. My mom was the first woman on the board of the Art Museum. And Buffalo's a weird place, a good place to grow up. Income inequality wasn't like it is now. You could have a day job at a Fortune 1000 company and have that kind of role in a place like Buffalo. There would regularly be 20 or 30 refugees come to our house for Thanksgiving. It was just, I thought this was all normal. It took me a long time to realize the rest of the world wasn't exactly like that.
Were you always this calm?
No, actually, I severely strained my vocal cords reading the audiobook. This is the first time I've spoken in a couple of weeks. I am intentionally trying to be calm right now.
I've used the same audio host or guest to record my 8 books. I've not done them myself, even though I've done 1,200 plus podcast episodes. As you bring that idea up, maybe just a quick nugget to share with would-be authors out there. Audiobooks have been an absolutely amazing, surprising source of popularity of my works. I can only imagine with the numbers of books that you have and a higher stature out there in the publishing world. I mean, were you ever surprised at how well audiobooks have done?
I do almost all my reading on audio now. I think that audiobooks are not books because they propel the reader forward. Book takes effort to turn the page. The audiobook turns the page for you. So the experience is different. I also think that reading is a more modern way of communication than listening. Listening is the oldest one. It gets to people at a different place. I've read every one of my books before. It's getting harder and harder to do physically. And now I have an AI that sounds exactly like me. I don't use it commercially, but I'm getting more and more tempted to do so.
Now you're bringing up the good stuff because, again, as I keep saying, as a guy that is recorded a lot of podcast episodes, has a lot of content, probably not as much as you, but I got a lot more content than most people do. How close are we away from the indistinguishable Seth and Mike AIs?
You know what the Uncanny Valley is?
Yes, I do know, but you can refresh my mind.
It's worth looking up. If you Google it on my blog, you'll see a photo you will never, ever forget. The Uncanny Valley is what happens if a robot or an AI is almost a person, but not quite. And our brain actually goes haywire. We don't know how to handle it. So if a robot or an AI is clearly a robot or an AI, we can use it as a tool. And if it's a person, we can't tell, but it's that in between where people freak out. The mistake a lot of people are making is they're rushing into the Uncanny Valley. I use Perplexity to do all my searches now. It never says I. ChatGPT says I a lot, and it feels arrogant because I know it's not a person because it keeps making mistakes. So the AI on my blog, you can ask it questions. It was the first author to have one. Doesn't say it talks to me about me in the third person because I didn't want it to put words in my mouth. And we're only a week away from AI being able to replicate a mediocre writer. The question is, will you develop a voice that AI will always have trouble replicating? And as soon as I saw LLMs for the first time, I doubled down on trying to sound like something that an LLM would have trouble duplicating.
One of my favorite compliments of my work is from my mother, who read my second book, which was a trading story with a trading, as you might say, tactics inside it. And she read it, which surprised me. She was older at that time. And she came back to me and she said, "It sounds just like you."
Exactly.
I mean, all of your books sound like you, right?
That's the goal.
And I've told family too. I don't mean to sound morbid about this, but I've told family, I've said, listen, if something happens to me, don't let me die because you can monetize Mike. Is there somebody in the Godin family that in the future will not let you pass on?
I worked on some of the material that Fulton Sheen left behind. And Zig Ziglar was a friend. Plenty of people I know who have voices who have retired. It doesn't work. It didn't work for L. Ron Hubbard. It doesn't work because it's not just the words, it is the motive force of a personality pushing them forward into the marketplace. Some people go to look at a Rembrandt in a museum, but there's a very big difference between a Rembrandt and a Shepard Fairey, because this idea that there's a person pushing it forward, I think, is critical in our culture.
You know what you're really doing is you're giving people permission to not be ubiquitous. It's like you're giving people permission to imagine that they can be valuable. Okay. You're at 20 plus books, a blog that goes on back, I don't know how many decades now. And you've also, I should say this too, you've got a long career, but you don't write the kind of stuff that goes out of date.
That's on purpose. It's expensive. It's expensive because every trend that has come along in the last 25 years, people have said to me, why aren't you X? Why aren't you chiming in on NFTs? Why aren't there comments on your blog? Whatever the thing that could make you hot. My feeling is, number one, I'm happy to cede that to other people. And number two, look at the people who were hot 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Where are they now? Because I don't see them.
There's something to be said for consistency.
I just want to do work I'm proud of.
This is hard in this day and age. I talk to so many young people that they see the influencer channels. They have figured out how to quote game it all. And they know they can make some money out of it, but they don't have their soul in it. They're not really into it. It's just a way to make money. Unfortunately, I think for a lot of the young people, that's just because they don't hear from enough voices like you. They're just hearing the voices on the TikToks that are saying, you can make a lot of money. You can make a lot of money. Just do this, optimize this. Generations are quite different these days.
Well, I'm not sure I want to ascribe an entire generation any behavior whatsoever. I will say that people who think TikTok is working for them are actually working for TikTok. The same thing is true for YouTube. They're generally underpaid labor waiting to win a lottery ticket. Someone's going to win the lottery, but it's probably not going to be you. You and I are old enough to remember people our age or people between our age and 20 who chased a different trend. There have been people chasing trends since we were born. So I don't think that part's unusual. I think what's unusual is how mechanized it's becoming.
I think you are correct in the sense that I don't want to use the word luck, but we came at the time where the opportunities in the, let's say, 94 to 96 time period was, my feeling at that moment was, get a website up for the content that I'm loving right now. I don't think that's the same motivation today, but I think unfortunately it's still a very, very valuable thing to have for an assortment of reasons, to have that place that is your home for your voice outside of the social media monsters.
Yes. And I don't know anybody who persistently blogs who regrets it.
Yeah. Well, it makes you feel good too, right? I mean, ultimately, when you write, I'm guessing here, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you write for you. You write because something feels good. You put it on paper, you look at those words and you're like, oh, that makes me feel good. And you know what? I'm betting if I share that, other people are going to like it. That's the whole process.
Yeah. I'm here to make a change happen. If I write a blog post that's like a warm bath, I don't feel much pride in it. If I can write something so that 2 years later, the same way you said earlier, I read this and then I changed and did that, that's good post.
I still find that Professor $45,000 post, I'll forget the link and I'll have to go search for it and find it and share it with people. Almost everyone I know in business read that post. No one ever says anything to me like, oh, Mike, oh, thank you. That was great, Mike. I sometimes think, am I just crazy? Why do I like it so much? Why do you think somebody would like that post so much?
His name was Henry Poydar. And I'm not sure it was a post or if it was in a book, but if you say it was a post, I believe you.
I think it's a blog post.
I think that what happens with a good story, particularly a true one, it gives people a way in. So it allows you to imagine being in that spot, even if you were not in that spot. Every once in a while, I can pull that off in a blog post. I think what resonated for you about it wasn't what I was writing about, but it was close enough that I'll take credit for it, which is this idea of agency. I think the dominant systems don't want us to have agency. The dominant systems want us to be either a victim or a cog. Dominant systems don't mind when we talk about secret conspiracy theories because the dominant system knows there aren't any secret conspiracies. There's just a conspiracy. But if it can distract us from the big system by getting us to waste time on the little ones, the system rolls on. A lot of my work has been about showing people a system and challenging them to find agency.
There are significant numbers of people across this planet who have done exceptionally well financially. For example, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I still go back. The house prices are to the moon. Everyone is involved with a big system called government. I never talked to anybody in that area that seems really terribly happy about this involvement. They all have the huge McMansion and everything, but I sometimes find the conversations are very kind of lower level. Everyone's very smart. I'm not saying that. I find that there's something that if you can locate early on, perhaps in your 20s or 30s, it feels so much more rewarding for me now looking back than when I have the conversations with the friends and associates and family members in the DC area. They don't seem to have that feeling sometimes. Maybe they found it in family and things like that. But in terms of the work products, I sometimes feel like where you go in your world is missing in so many people.
Well, you're bringing up a whole bunch of interesting points. The first one I'll talk about is the narcissism of small differences. This is a psychology idea that's 100 years old. Basically, almost everybody on earth has privilege now, that we're not worried about being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or dying in our sleep, that there's a civilization around us. It supports some people far more than others. Now we have to focus our survival energy on something that isn't actually based on survival. The narcissism of small differences invites people into life or death arguments about things that aren't that different from each other. They're just safe and comfortable to argue about. So some of the people, when we talk about politics, are using it as a sport. It's an enervating, degrading sport that doesn't usually make people better. Governance is different than politics. Governance is community action to create a civilization that we're proud of. There are people who are part of a bureaucracy who find in that bureaucracy comfort and reliability and a chance to make incremental difference. There are other people in bureaucracy who focus on that narcissism of small difference, that boss that won't let them do something or that opponent that's undermining them. If we focus on that, that becomes the narration of our day. I know plenty of people, geographically or professionally, who are in various bureaucracies who are thrilled at the chance to do the work that they do. Being thrilled is a choice. One of the things the system has done, aided in large measure by folk media, is made a profit by dividing us and made a profit by making us unhappy. And marketers are really guilty of this because the easiest way to sell somebody something is to persuade them that what they have now is insufficient. If they only bought one more thing, then they would be happy. So marketers sow discontent aggressively because they get paid to do it. That's a long rant, but there you go.
As somebody who unfortunately has a political science degree and somebody who once ran for public office, I can safely say that what you just said is so nonpartisan and so accurate that if you don't understand it, please listen again to what he just said. I mean, true, it really is. That is what's going on, right? And across that backdrop, perhaps it decreases collaboration, it decreases sharing, it decreases the opportunities for people that perhaps got different ways of doing things to come together to make something great happen.
Yeah, I used to write for Fast Company. When something is fresh and there's new territory in front of us, I believe it pushes humans to be an even better version of themselves. One of the challenges of institutions is they have trouble staying fresh. Under Steve Ballmer, Microsoft was a disaster, partly because he was one of the worst CEOs in history, but partly because they didn't do much that felt fresh. And so what Nadella has done that's brilliant is made bets, some of them wrong, some of them right, that challenged people to imagine tomorrow as opposed to defending yesterday.
And for the foil of Microsoft, I concur with what you just said, but as an all Mac guy, I keep waiting for my next interesting Mac innovation to come along. I'm thinking, what's going on here? We're treading water, please.
I think that Tim has been very clear as someone whose heart has been broken by the company for the last bunch of years. He's been very clear that the product Apple makes is stock price. It's very difficult to criticize the innovation he has accomplished. As someone who owns 0 shares, I can say that for the last 10 years, that's the only thing that they've been focused on producing.
I concur. We've only got limited time here today, but today I could have gone ahead with this strategy in my hands and gone down a point by point, lead you through, and I'm sure somebody will do this to you. I'm sure many people will do it to you, but it's just not my style. I'm not a guy with a lot of notes. I like to talk to people and feel what they have to say. Ultimately, the way that people will be most interested in checking out your new book is listening to a cool conversation with you, period. It's always about that, right?
It's a privilege. I appreciate the effort you're putting into it. Thank you, Michael.
It's great stuff. I'm a big fan. You've done so much work and so many books, so many ideas and concepts. But I think for me, ultimately, it comes down to the idea that an individual, one person in this sea of systems that are layered on top of us, that one person can say, oh, you know what? I want to exist and do something different. I want to create something different. And I want to go to the marketplace and I want to try. And I don't even want to have any fear about it because fear is not going to help me one way or the other. I just want to try. And if I get it wrong the first time, which I did when I first tried, I'm going to try again. Because the moment for me, the moment that I first got feedback, the first emails, the first any kind of communication in the mid 1990s, I was like, game on. I'm reaching anybody and everyone across the world. Game on. I'm playing this for the rest of my life. I'm sure it was similar for you.
Well said, but I will also flip it with, you're not sitting in traffic. You are traffic. And the people who most aggressively talk about how bad the system is are also part of the system. We have a chance to, in the small, act in the way that we are proud of and help it spread, as opposed to simply throwing a rock at something that we are part of but didn't build. And we need more building.
Well said as well. I'll leave you with one final thought. I was in Phnom Penh, Cambodia recently for the first time. They had a museum there that a friend of mine that I was traveling with, we went and we saw. And it was a museum from the Pol Pot era. I walked into this courtyard of this school that had been turned into a prison. I know this sounds pretty crazy, but this is what happened. I had this feeling of like, wow, this is terrible. The stuff that where most of us are living is not terrible. That was terrible. And you had the feeling, I think you've already made the point in this conversation, that just to broaden out, to realize that we've got it pretty good, roll with the punches, keep trying, right?
Your work you're proud of. I'm sure your mom would be proud of you if we act every day like someone's watching. There's a lot to be said for that. Resilience in the long run beats winning any round of any boxing match.
Seth, the book, this is strategy. People can find it everywhere. Where can we send them? Where would you like to direct people to come check you out and learn about all these blog posts that I've been talking about?
My blog is at seths.blog. If you go to seths.blog/TIS, you will find all sorts of stuff about the book.
Seth, cool stuff. Keep me posted on future books. I'm always game for another conversation. Hopefully you enjoyed this one.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you. Take care.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.